Hello, my name is Jonathan Steen. If I were to ask you to walk 2,200 miles, what would your reaction be? Okay, let's make it interesting. How about 2,200 miles through the dead of winter and all the things that entails, walking through the snow with nothing to survive on but what you can carry with you, or what you can maybe find along the way that'll help you survive the rest of the journey. Oh, and by the way, if you say no, more than likely you're going to get shot in the back of the head. Sound crazy? This was the reality for thousands of Native Americans during the late 1820s through the 1830s. It is an event that forever changed the lives of millions of Native Americans today. It is known as the Trail of Tears. The whole Indian nations were uprooted and moved out to the western frontier under reservations because of this great travesty against the Native American people. There are 5 main tribes that were affected by this great move. The Chickasaw, which resided in northern modern-day Mississippi. The Choctaw, which were just south of them in about the midsection of the state and a little bit into the southern regions. The Creek, who lived in modern-day Alabama on the eastern side of the state. The Seminole, who lived in central Florida. And the Cherokee, who lived on the northeastern corner of Alabama and the northwestern regions of Georgia. Altogether, these Indians occupied about 200 million acres of land. This land was desired greatly by the white pioneers that were moving out west onto the new frontier when this country was still young. There were several efforts to buy land from the Native Americans, but as most of them refused, the white settlers' thoughts turned to forcibly removing the Indians from their lands so that they could occupy them and spread out and develop the country. As expected, there was much debate and several rebellions as a result of this decision to try to move the Indians by force. These efforts were spearheaded by President Andrew Jackson. James Monroe, President Jackson's predecessor, had made several treaties with Indians that had actually volunteered to give up some of their lands in exchange for government lands in the West. Jackson was very outspoken about how much he hated the Indians. He looked down upon them and thought them lesser beings and more uncivilized people, and that white people were the answer to developing the rest of the country, and the Native Americans simply needed to be put down. There was also much dissension between the full and mixed-blooded Indians about giving up tribal lands. Since they had both claim to the white and the Indian nations, the mixed-blooded Indians really had, for the most part, no trouble trying to selling their lands. As long as they were able to make some money by actually selling them rather than just giving them away to the government. Full-blooded Indians, for the most part, however, wanted to maintain their ancestral homes because of all the sacred burial grounds and such that they had on their property that they owned. One of the biggest conflicts that occurred in the Creek Nation was when a mixed-blooded Creek chief named William McIntosh was executed by tribal council for signing a treaty that sold all of the tribe's lands in Georgia and 2/3 of the land in Alabama. In 1830, President Jackson passed the Indian Removal Act, which authorized him to, by force, remove the Indians from their land and take them to the western reservations that the government had deemed to give them, about 32 million acres worth of land. The treaty also provided $500,000 to cover the expense of the move, which, when you think about moving 30,000 people over 1,000 miles from their home without any other transportation other than walking, is a ridiculous amount of money because they would use that up very quickly. The Cherokees were considered the most civilized tribe of these 5 southeastern tribes, and they had a government that very much resembled our own. They went to our government and declared themselves an independent nation in 1827. They wanted to reside and govern themselves within the United States on the land that they still owned. The Georgia state government, however, did not see it that way and tried to get jurisdiction over Cherokee lands. The Cherokees then went to the Supreme Court, where Chief Justice John Marshall denied them their independence, but did support their claims to the land that they had owned, saying that they could not be an independent nation, but they could maintain their property and stay on the lands that they had. President Jackson, however, ignored this ruling and had federal agents persuade some minor chiefs to sign the Treaty of New Echota in 1835. This ceded all Cherokee lands in the United States for $5.6 million and free passage to the West. This was opposed by most of the Cherokees and was ratified in Congress by only one vote, so it was basically a backdoor way into stealing their land. These events combined to produce the largest forced migration in American history. The Choctaws, Creeks, and Chickasaws were moved starting in the late 1820s and early 1830s. They were moved across parts of Arkansas and up through Tennessee and all sorts of ways, but well over 1,000 miles from their original homelands. And there were some Creek Indians who is recorded who wanted to stay in their houses that were forcibly removed. And most of these were actually removed in chains like they were slaves. The Seminoles fought the United States forces that were sent to move them for 7 years in a war that cost the United States government over $20 million. In the end, they were finally removed in 1842, taken across the Gulf of Mexico in ships and moved onto the reservations in northern Texas and Oklahoma. The Cherokees suffered the worst fate. In October of 1838, a General Winfield Scott took 7,000 men and forcibly drove the Cherokees from their lands in Georgia and Alabama to the reservations in the West. They were forced to make the 2,200-mile march through the harsh winter, mostly on foot. Over 4,000 of the Cherokees died between 1838 and 1839. As a result from this great tragedy, the American government obtained over 190 million acres of land that cost them about $70 million in gifts and annual payments and some direct payments to the Indians, most of which were never fulfilled. Nearly 100,000 Indians were moved from their ancestral homes, and 15,000 died of exposure, disease, and hunger during the journey. This tragic event in American history has affected our culture in art and the way we handle our policies with the Native Americans that are still around today, who seek justice for what was done to them all those years ago. But the effect on the Native American people has been the most drastic, as many of the people that were moved turned to abusive behaviors such as alcohol and drug abuse to deal with the pain of losing their homes. I just hope that by studying this and hearing more about this, we can learn not to make the same mistakes our ancestors did in dealing with political issues of modern day.